Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Managrind tournament recap, talking about the top decks, talking about the top cards, and the state of the metagame, which comes out in an article form on Friday on Hearthstone. So by all means, go check that out on Friday. It'll be on the front page of hearthstone.com. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? On to the top four. From NA, we had in first place Dear Jason, in second place Plan P, who actually came first last time, and tied for third we have N.V. Mavness, crazy name. Anyway, N.V. Mavness and Clam Handler, which is an amazing name. On to first place, Dear Jason, who is playing Druid midrange. Now, as usual, if there are any repeats, then I will just sort of quickly go over the differences as opposed to the full deck list again. There aren't that many repeats in this particular one, but just to let you guys know. Anyway, starting with the minions, we have Blood Mage Thalnos, extra spell damage, do some more cycling. Nat Pagle also shows up for the draw power, a little bit slower than it used to be, but still playable in this kind of deck. Then have Black Knight as solid removal with no more Tinkmaster. Karen Bloodhoof holds down the mid game, with Cenarius and Ragnaros holding down the late game, providing really swingy, large creatures in the late game to beat down your opponent. We then have two Ancient Allures, which help a lot with draw power and can heal you specifically against aggro decks and mostly against hunter-based aggro decks. You really need that healing. Attached to a 5/5, really valuable minion, one of the best ones in the entire deck. Then I have the Big Game Hunter Faceless Manipulator combo, the Ragnaros Killer combination, where you copy it, kill it, you get Ragnaros, and a 4/2, they no longer have a Ragnaros. 2 cards, but still 8 mana. Then I have Keeper of the Grove, one of the best silencers in the entire game, very versatile, can also take out things like Fairy Dragon and Knife Juggler in these aggro decks, along with Flame Imp. And then we have Harvest Golem, Sunfury Protector to hold down the early game, with Druid Claw and Chillwind Yeti for that really big mid-game power. Onto the spells, we do have the standard Wrath Swipe Innervate combination, which is universal in pretty much all Druid decks. We have one Healing Touch to help against aggro decks, and the Force of Nature Savage Roar as that final finisher. Random tech, we have one Claw. Now, Claw isn't generally played in these kinds of decks, but considering how many aggro decks have been around recently, things like Fairy Dragon as well, you really need Claw to deal with Fairy Dragon. Specifically, helps a lot against Knife Juggler and just zoo decks in general. Any aggro, Claw is good against. The reason it isn't played too much is because it's pretty mediocre against some of the slower decks. Now, on to second place, Plan P playing Handlock. I hate the name of this deck. I really hate the name of this deck, but I'm finally gonna cave in and call it Handlock just because that's what people know it as, but I really hate the name. Anyway, moving on to the actual deck. Starting with the minions, we have Alexstrasza and Lord Jaraxxus as health resets and sort of universal late game win conditions and stabilizers. Then I have a Leroy Jenkins as a late game finisher, along with all the giants and faceless manipulators in the actual deck. Speaking of faceless manipulator, it has a lot of targets in this particular deck, and let's get started with the actual targets. Now, onto the Shields Up engine, we have 4 giants and Ancient Watchers. Ancient Watchers primarily defensive, with the giants being primarily offensive. Then I have 2 Sunfury, 2 Defender to enable these. Then I have 2 Earthring Farseer to deal with life tap and also can heal up your own giants a little bit if you need it against mid-range decks. Along with 2 Iron Beak Owls, not just 1. 2 because you want 1 for your opponent, and 1 you can even use near an Ancient Watcher. Take away that little line of text so you can actually attack with it as it's a normal Yeti. Speaking of Yetis, 2 Yetis in this deck as well. Pretty solid with the Shields Up engine and just a good minion overall. As for the spells, we have 2 Siphon Soul to deal with some of the really large targets like Ragnaros or even things like Druid of the Claw if needed. 1 Shadow Flame, massive board wipe considering the minions in this particular deck. 2 Hellfires. Interesting that we have 2 Hellfires and 1 Shadow Flame instead of 2 Shadow Flames and 1 Hellfire. He's looking for slightly less situational board removal, but it does hurt him as well. Then we have 2 Soulfires. Discards are really painful in this particular deck, but the effect is so powerful, along with Mortal Coil for things like Harvest Golem, so you can evenly trade with it. And lastly, we have thing in my throat. Anyway, lastly, we have 1 Power Overwhelming, specifically for Leroy Jenkins over other things. It gives you a little bit of extra punch on your Leroy. On to Mavness, who is playing Druid Tokens, a deck we don't see too often, but is still lying around. Onto the actual minions, we do have Blood Mage Thalnos, Nat Pagle, along with the 2 Ancient Allures. Pretty standard, along with Keeper of the Groves and Harvest Golems. That's all pretty normal for a Druid perspective. However, we do have one Leroy Jenkins because it's playing a more aggro-centric style. We then have two Azure Drakes and Gadgetzan for that draw power. Especially Gadgetzan, there's a lot of cheap spells in the deck. Azure Drake is just a solid 5-drop overall. Then we have two Violet Teachers along with Argent Squire, Loot Hoarder, and Harvest Golem. No Imp Master in this particular variant. We're just playing more of the value creatures along with the Violet Teacher as the token engine as opposed to Imp Master included. Now what this lets you do is you litter the board with as many effects as possible, and then you can Power of the Wild to give them all +1/+1, and Savage Roar also will just give you a huge damage swing, and you just do lots and lots of damage out of nowhere. Power of the Wild has a very, very interesting interaction with Violet Teacher where you make a token, then you make it into a 2/2 straight away. So that's an interesting interaction you can play around with. It does come into effect. Onto the actual spells, we do have the standard Innervate, Swipe, Broth. Innervate in particular is very, very powerful in this deck because it synergizes with Violet Teacher. Then I have Force of Nature, Savage Roar, along with the One-of Claw. The One-of Claw, again, I described it earlier why it's in here. Just interesting to see how both the Druid decks play it. We have two Savage Roars because, as I said earlier, Savage Roar can be used with all the tokens. It doesn't just have to be used with Force of Nature to get that value out of it. And lastly, we have Power of Wild as great buffs all around the board and can just be a 3/2 for 2 sometimes. Now, onto the last deck from NA, we have Clam Handler, who's playing the Warrior Control deck. Now, Warrior Control completely destroyed NA last time, and this time it hasn't been doing as well, but it's still very, very consistent and showing that it can universally make top 4s over and over and over again. Starting with the early cards, we have Armorsmith along with Frothing Berserker, Acolyte Pain, Cruel Taskmaster, the Enrage Engine, and Wild Pyromancer. Now, Wild Pyromancer allows you to trigger your own Enrages and also functions as pretty good board clear. Whirlwind also allows you to trigger your own Enrages. Speaking of the Enraged minions, we have Acolyte Pain, draws you a lot of cards early. Cruel Taskmaster, enrages your own stuff, can also be used as removal, 1 damage removal. Then a Frothing Berserker, you need the early threat, and an Armorsmith combination with any of the other Enraged minions will just let you get tons and tons of armor over time. On to the actual spells, we have Shield Block, Shield Slam. Shield Slam is a very, very, very heavy piece of removal in this particular deck. You can get it off for 5, 6, 7. I've seen 20 damage Shield Slams sometimes. And even though, 20 damage Shield Slams, think, wait a second, that's just a stupid game where they couldn't possibly lose. Actually, no, you can beat people from 20 armor. And quite frankly, against some of the really, really slow decks like Shaman Midrange, you do get 20 armor a lot. But Shield Slam is the universal removal, pretty much anything in this kind of deck. Then I have 2 Executes along with Whirlwinds and Slams, just solid Execute engine lets you deal with pretty much anything. And lastly for the spells, we have a 1-of Brawl, which just is board clear. You need the board clear sometimes. It doesn't always work in your favor, but you still need 1-of. As for the weapons, we have 2 Fiery War Axes for removal and a Gore Howl, which can be used as direct damage, but more often than not ends up being used entirely for removal, since you have all that armor to spend as health. Now, lastly, we're going to be going over the Legendary engine. We have Alexstrasza, helps bring your opponent down since you won't be doing much damage to them for most of the game. Also synergized with Gore Howl for the straight one-shot kill. Anyway, we then have Baron Geddon, board wipes, become very, very popular in this particular list recently. Ragnaros, Grom, comes up in the late game, gives you a lot of reach because it's direct damage. We then have Ysera, gives you card advantage if you're really, really stuck in these sort of fatigue mirrors. Karen Bloodhoof helps the mid to early game and also generally baits some hard removal like Hex. It's really, really difficult to trade with Karen without hexing him or silencing him or something. So generally, he is a very, very good removal bait. And lastly, we have Faceless Manipulator because you do in fact have 6 different targets for your own Faceless Manipulator in this deck and you'll always get one. On to the top 4 from EU, we have in first place Benign. In second place, Random Sort. And tied for third, we had You Will Fail and Spark. Moving on to first place Benign, who was also playing Warrior Control. Now, this particular list is extremely, extremely similar to the one we just went over. So I'm just going to go over the very, very few differences. There isn't any Wild Pyromancer in this particular list, and this is also playing a Harrison Jones as weapon removal, and a Black Knight to get over some of the taunts which you can have issues with. Things like Druid of the Claw and Ancient of War come to mind when you look at these. Even things like Sen'jin can be annoying to get over. But besides that, the list is pretty much exactly the same. Oh, skip too far forward. Anyway, on to Random Sort, who's also playing another deck we've seen already, Handlock. Now, this particular variant, it's pretty similar overall. We do still have the giants and defenders and things like that. We have Twilight Drakes in this one, just give you a bunch of health. You can get 5-10 Twilight Drakes with taunt if you put a defender next to them, for example. Rest of the stuff, though, pretty similar. Still playing the 2-1 split of Hellfire to Shadowflame as opposed to choose Shadowflame to Hellfire. So if you're a Handlock player, something to note is that 2 Hellfires, 1 Shadowflame is doing more work in tournaments than 2 Shadowflame, 1 Hellfire, which is the conventional way of doing it. The other differences in this particular list, we have Ragnaros, a bit of extra punch late game, and a Nat Pagal for that early draw, and only 1 Iron Becal. No Yetis in this list either. Now, there are 2 Hunter decks here. They're both different as well. Firstly, we're going to go over You Will Fail, who's playing Hunter Rush. Now, this is, you could call the bane of everyone's existence on ladder. People hate playing against this so much. It's the Rush You Down deck, where they just keep going for your face over and over and over again. Starting with the minions, we have Leroy Jenkins, Arcane Golem, Lepronome, and Iron Becal. All function different. They all have slightly different ways of synergizing with the deck. Arcane Golem, Leroy are always finishers, Lepronome helps from extra pressure early, and Iron Becal gets over taunts. Now, Leroy can also synergize with the Unleash the Hounds combo, which we're going to go over slightly later. Arcane Golem has a drawback to it, but you can still play it a bit earlier, and Iron Becal turns on your kill command, so they all have various different ways of looking at it. Now, Starving Buzzard and Timberwolf go in a combo with Unleash the Hounds. Now, the combo is you go Starving Buzzard, then you go Unleash the Hounds with Timberwolf. You can clear your opponent's board, do some damage to them, draw a bunch of cards, helps keep the deck afloat in the mid game. Now, you can play this with Leroy Jenkins and get 2 extra whelps for the late game, or you can just use it as sort of an arcane explosion that can be buffed. Now, for the rest of the deck, we have 2 flares for cycling, and also 2 trackings. Now, some decks only play 1 of these. I would say that if you only plan on playing 1, I'd play tracking, but you kind of need the flares to secret clear as well against mages. You don't want to get ice blocked, for example, or ice barrier. Those can really set you back. So I would play the full 4, 2 of each. But if you really want to cut 1, I would keep the tracking, because you need to go into those direct damage spells when you actually have the opportunity to kill your opponent. Then we have 2 Misdirection, 2 Explosive Trap, 1 Freezing Trap, Trap Engine to support your Eagle Horn bows. That's a big source of damage in this particular deck. 3 damage a time is also one of the only times you'll be removing your opponent's stuff. Then I have 1 Deadly Shot, which is a very interesting tech card, not usually played, but is mainly used to get over big taunts like Senjin, Druid of Claw, and Ancient of War, which they have issues getting over. Then I have 2 Animal Companions, one of the slowest cards in the entire deck if you don't get the Huffer, but an equally powerful one as everything else. 3-drop. Leok is the worst one in this particular deck. It's still a 2-4, however. Misha, pretty powerful. And if you get the Huffer, then you just get 4 damage for free. Then I have Hunter's Mark. This is the other way of getting over taunts in the deck, along with Kill Command. Straight Direct usually can be used as removal, but preferably you want to use a Straight Direct. Same with Arcane Shot. Very, very interesting deck to see come this far. Normally your deck is quite inconsistent, so it doesn't get to the top of single elimination tournaments, but it is very, very interesting to see one of them make that far. Now, on to the last deck for this week. We have Spark, who's playing a Hunter Beast Aggro deck. Now, this is the other variation of Hunter. This is playing a lot slower of a game, a lot more fair game in terms of straight Hearthstone, as opposed to continuously rushing your opponent down. On to the actual minions, we have King Mukla as a straight 3-drop that's incredibly powerful. You get it down on turn 3. A little awkward if you get it down later, but it's really, really powerful. You get it down on turn 2 with coin, or turn 3. It also turns on all your kill commands. Then I have Leroy Jenkins, rush down at the end of the game. 2 Savannah Highmanes. Highmane is one of the strongest creatures in the entire game. Very, very powerful beast. Will essentially drive the entire deck late game. Iron Becal helps get over taunt, but then have Starving Buzzard as your draw engine, along with Scavenging Hyena, which is your big threat. It's kind of like the Falling Berserker of the deck, if you will. The more stuff dies, the bigger it gets, and it just runs over your opponent if they don't deal with it. Lastly, for the minions, we have Stone Tusk Boar, straight beast that can rush down a little bit. Timberwolf can also buff it in this particular case. Timberwolf buffs things like Unleash the Hounds tokens is the major thing from there. It's just a solid overall thing, although if you're playing against something like Mage, you definitely want to wait for Unleash the Hounds. Rogue and Druid, similar, but you can always put it behind Taunt. Speaking of Taunt, we have Houndmaster. The best Houndmaster targets in this deck are probably things like King Mukla, Savannah Highmane, even something like Scavenging Hyena if it gets really, really large, or Stone Tusk Boar even becomes a 3-3. Now, onto the actual spells. We have 1 Flare, gets over secrets, also a bit of cycling. 2 Trackings is the main cycle engine in this particular deck, however. Then I have a Deadly Shot, gets over big taunts. Explosive Trap, Freezing Trap, just the two traps because you only have 1 bow. It's a sort of a half engine as far as the Eagle Horn bows go in this particular variant. 2 Unleash the Hounds, I described the combo in the last deck, very, very powerful. 2 Animal Companions, very, very solid 3-drop. The strongest one in this particular deck is probably Misha, then Huffer, then Leok. Leok and Huffer are kind of, they're on the same level depending on the time. If you need something for removal, Huffer is stronger, but if you have board advantage, then Leok is actually stronger in this particular one. But Misha is generally the most powerful of the animal companions in this particular deck. Then I have Kill Command and Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark to get a big taunts, Kill Command, direct damage, although you will be using it more as removal in this particular version as opposed to the Rushdown one. And overall, if you notice in the actual deck, it runs a lot more of a mid-rangey type feel. Now, this is, you could say, is described as more of a fair deck. It doesn't mean that the other one is unfair. It just means that you can beat this one by playing straight Hearthstone, just get card advantage, life advantage, and grind them out, whereas the other one you kind of need to race, which is why it's so annoying to play against on ladder. That's why it's not terribly consistent, but when it does find the right matchups, it powers through them and makes it all the way up to top 4. Anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, just want to talk, put it in the comment section below. If you want to come chat to me, I am on Teamspeak. I'll put the information to Managrind's Teamspeak in the description. Thank you all for watching. This has been Jotto, signing off.